your board, the what, when, why, and how of effective board management. So I welcome you. I'm very pleased and privileged to be presenting this webinar presentation to you, to all of you this evening. Before we get into the formal presentation, as usual, I will go ahead and share my housekeeping comments. As with past webinars, this webinar too is being recorded, and it will ultimately get uploaded to Lake Superior State University's Charter Schools Office website, and hopefully we'll have that available for future access within the next couple of weeks. And then also I want to share with you that, as these webinars go, we try to make them as interactive as possible. We recognize that the format isn't entirely conducive to the kind of interaction that we might experience if we were all together in a conference room. But to make this as interactive as possible, I want you to feel free to use either your hand icon or your questions pane or your chat pane that you see on your screen. I monitor those very closely throughout the session, and as you have questions, as you have comments to share, please feel free to use one of those avenues for doing that. I'm pleased again to be co-presenting this webinar this evening with my friend and colleague Dave Patterson. I'll pass the proverbial torch to him and he can share a little bit more about himself, but let me just share with you, generally speaking, that Dave currently serves as a superintendent at Charlton Heston Academy. Charlton Heston Academy is in its second year of operation in St. Helen, Michigan, and Dave is the founding superintendent for that school, working closely with the students, families, and the board there. Dave actually came to Charlton Heston from Woodward Public School Academy, where he also served as superintendent. And I had the true privilege of working with Dave when I was working at the Center for Charter Schools at Central Michigan University. And I was just, sharing with some other folks that one of the very valuable components that Dave can add to this conversation is that he's really worked both ends of this spectrum that we're going to be talking about this evening. He's functioned obviously in that superintendent capacity, and he's also worked very closely with boards in his role at Central Michigan University. So really will offer a nice, well-rounded perspective on how to manage your board. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Dave, and you can share a little bit more with Cheryl about yourself and share whatever you think might be important to share this evening.
Thank you for the introduction, Angie. And so Angie gave a little bit of my background there, and so I think I hope to add some value here to the presentation. But yeah, I think really I was off to a really fortunate start in the charter schools world, if you will, and working at Central Michigan University in their Office of Governance and working directly with school boards. And so never really knew how valuable my time at CMU was until I took on the first school leadership position, and then somewhat second nature, managing school board meetings and school boards and the communication and relationships that kind of tie into all that. Really sprung out of my time at CMU. So yeah, I hope to add some value, and I really appreciate and feel fortunate of being involved here. So thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, not a problem, Dave. And then Nick, if you'd like to share a few thoughts, again, with Cheryl or with whomever else might be participating in this webinar, feel free to do that.
Cheryl, it's nice to have you be part of this webinar. Hopefully I'll be able to meet you in August when we have our administrators retreat up on campus, August 6th and 7th. And if there's any topics that you feel you'd like to have presented at that time, just give me an email letting me know what's happening. I think you have a great presenter in Dave Patterson. Dave and I have worked together for the last couple of years when Charlton Heston was chartered by Lake Superior State University, and I respect him for the knowledge that he has, and he knows how to deal with boards, so I think he'll be able to provide us some really interesting information about that. So enjoy it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Nick. So without further ado, Cheryl, we'll go ahead and get started. Before we jump into the presentation, let me just clarify and define a little bit what I mean and what we mean by managing your board. This webinar in no way suggests that a school leader or a superintendent, whatever you might call yourself in your day-to-day functions at the schools that you lead, should control your board. So when I say manage, I'm not talking about controlling. In the context of this presentation, I'm talking about providing tips, hopefully helpful tips, to school leaders that will help your respective boards really perfect their governance practices, making their lives and frankly your life much easier, much more productive, and really bridging that positive relationship between the board and the school leader. So just a bit of a clarification on that word managing and manage. So we're going to this evening spend a little time talking about all the components that we believe to be very effective in that board management. But before, again, we get into that, I just want to share with you this visual that, Cheryl, you've probably seen in past presentations. This is just a nice reminder of what each role should be focused on. So board governance is really always about the ensuring. So ensuring how well the students are learning, how well we're managing the taxpayers' dollars, how well we're managing general operations at the school, or ensuring effective management of operations at the school. And the school leader, here I say operator, but that school leader, that's that superintendent again, whatever that leadership title is that you give yourselves, is really about executing against what hopefully has been identified as those ideal outcomes between the board and between the school leader. So just again, a quick reminder on what the context under which we're operating. And of course, as board governance, the role for them, along with you as a school leader, is to always ensure from the board level that the school leader is executing against the mission and the vision, and that the school leader is working toward establishing or achieving those student outcomes that have been established between both of you, between the board and the school leader, and certainly articulated in the charter contract. And then, of course, there's the evaluation component of the board against performance of the school leader, of the operator, again, whatever role that might be. We're not going to spend a lot of time talking about evaluations of the school leader this evening, but it is a very critical part of determining that how well answer those outcomes-based answers that the board is always looking for. So again, a little context, and once you understand that the board's focus is the outcomes and the operator, CEO, superintendent focus is the inputs, you really have the ingredients for developing an effective leadership team. And as the National Association of School Boards suggests, an effective leadership team is really about a board that governs plus a superintendent that administers. So again, just a little context for our conversation. And as I've done in the past, as I've worked with co-presenters, I'm going to ask Dave if he has anything that he'd like to add here before we move on to the next slide. So Dave, anything else that you'd like to share before we get into the communications piece?
I like that quote there from National Association of School Boards, and I think you and I talked earlier about policy governance, so I hope I'm not jumping the gun on that. I know it'll come up later.
Right.
But, I do want to plug that in that, I'm biased, but I believe my board really does subscribe to policy governance, and then, I follow the place with the administers part of that quote. And I think when you do have that blend there, or specific duties, it's very evident, and so I don't think I've seen that quote before. Maybe I missed it. I really agree with that.
Yeah, right. Good, good. Yeah, very good. And again, this is for context. So as we're walking through this presentation this evening, Cheryl and again whomever else might be on the line from the school leadership perspective, just continues to remember where those focuses lie in the context of this board superintendent relationship. So then, moving on, we're going to talk about effective board management, and I will share with you that I believe in my history of working in the charter school sector, and certainly Dave agrees, that effective board management starts with communication, 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 right? So the context of this discussion is not designed to repeat. Cheryl, if you participated in the January session where we talked about effective communication between the board and its educational service provider, and as you recall in the context of that presentation, we really talked about the importance of defining a mutually acceptable definition of effective communication. This session we're going to delve in a little bit more deeply. We're going to break it down in the context of the board-school leader relationship by identifying within the context of communication the what, when, why, and how. So again, hopefully you'll be able to take a couple of helpful nuggets away from this session to really apply in your school leadership board relationship. So I shared this cartoon in my January session, and I really think that it's an effective cartoon to continue to share when we talk about communication, because it really is about understanding always when you lift, right? And I'm using air quotes, but you can't see me. So the cartoon is depicting that there's a kind of miscommunication among what presumably appears to be surgeons about, when you put a patient on the table and when you take him or her off. And understanding that you always lift on 3 is an important piece, I think, of just the communication message. So it's really about always being on the same page. But again, in the context of this discussion this evening, we're going to define effective communication by helping you understand what you should be sharing with your board, help you understand when or how often your board would like you to share it, why it's important that you even share information, and how your board would like you to communicate with it. And when we talk about that piece of communication and managing your board, we're going to talk about not only collective board dynamics, but understanding the individual personalities of your board members as well. So I think when we get to that section, Dave will have some interesting comments to share relative to that piece as well. So moving on, we're going to talk about the what, and I will share with you, Cheryl and Nick and Dave, you've heard this, that I often feel like a broken record when I continue to reiterate that at the end of the day, what it is that the board is interested in and what it is that the school leader should be sharing is all around children learning, finances being safeguarded, and business operations in good working order. And this really comes from the relationship, too, of the authorizer with the board, because as you both will recall, Dave and Cheryl, at the end of the day, this is really what Nick in the Lake Superior State University team is evaluating you against contractually. So it's really important to always remember that not only is the board interested in this, but the board is interested in these 3 components relative to the contractual goals that have been identified for it and with it through its authorizer. So those are the what pieces that we're going to focus on for the next few slides. So the first one we're going to talk about is, are the children learning? And in the context of are the children learning, we're really talking about student achievement data primarily. So when we talk about student achievement data and we talk about communicating with the board and sharing that student achievement data information with them, we're really talking about primarily 7 key areas. We're talking about student growth and proficiency data, of course. So obviously NWEA MAP, performance series results, MEP results. We're talking about cohort data, and hopefully you, Cheryl, and I know that Dave does this, you're providing your board with a nice visual of how you're doing with new students, how well you're doing with all students, and how well your or the school is doing with continuously enrolled students. And arguably that continuously enrolled students is the most important part of that cohort information, because at the end of the day, Lake Superior State University as your authorizer, and likely the board, wants to know how well are we doing with the students that have been with us the longest. Are we growing them academically? Are they achieving? So that cohort data, and particularly that continuously enrolled student piece, is really important. The subgroup data, how well are we doing with our ESL students, our students with disabilities, our economically disadvantaged students? So what are those subgroups looking like in the context of academic outcomes? How well are we doing preparing our students for college? We sometimes say that our responsibility is to help prepare our students for college, work, and life. So how well are we doing preparing our students for college? What does that data look like? So this is going to be an Explore, Plan, ACT, MME focus. And also, how are we doing against our mission? So just a little note here. I'm working with a group right now that's really looking at starting a very unique, specific school that is focused on educating children with autism spectrum disorder. So one of the conversations we're having is around accountability and recognizing that those accountability measures for them might look a little different than what they would look like in a traditional charter school or conventional public school setting. So what I'm sharing with them is, you know, be just incredibly tight on your mission, and be able to demonstrate at the end of the day that while your assessment outcomes might not be looking like some of your other schools' authorizer, we are meeting our mission of achieving with these ASD children what we've set out to achieve. So really collecting that mission-specific data is important as well. Subject data, how well are our students doing in reading and math and science and social studies? And Cheryl and Dave, you as well, you recently received MEP reports from Lake Superior State University. So hopefully, if you haven't had an opportunity to talk to your board about those results, about those reports yet, you'll do that at your next regularly scheduled board meeting. And then at-risk programs, how well are we doing educating our at-risk students, and how well are we managing the dollars that are tied to those at-risk programs? So a little bit of student achievement and financial performance tied together with the at-risk pieces. So now I've shared with you what that student achievement data should look like as you speak to your board, as you share it with your board. I'm going to unmute Dave, and I'm going to ask you, Dave, again, to share some of that practical experience that you've had with your board, particularly at Charlton Heston, around these student achievement components.
Yeah, so, you know, we use quite a few different assessments, and assessments continue to get more elaborate. And so our board has went through quite a bit of training through Lake State, and then we've had some private consultants come up, and then over time they've asked me to meet with them individually, just at their home in a private setting or whatever, just one-on-one to really drill down to discuss, you know, what is proficiency, what is scaled score growth, everything that surrounds our key assessments, both our local and the state assessments. And so that's something that took a lot of time on the front end of the school, and that we revisited it when assessment data is available. But that was very valuable, I believe, and that was an idea that came really just from a couple of the board members saying, we need some more time one-on-one, Dave, to really ask the questions, and so I'm glad we did that. One of the things that we do is we do a lot of segregation and these subgroups that you're speaking of, and especially the at-risk programs because of the amount of dollars that are tied to our Title I program, the 31A dollars. And so, you know, our goal, among other things, is to show that those students are growing at a faster rate than students without those supplemental programs. And you know, and if you're not doing that, you got to tweak where you're spending that money, of course. But we do that very often throughout the school year. But then, you know, I'm considering all of this. I think it just takes time. You know, I'm constantly asking the board for feedback on, did you like the way we presented the meet data? Was it too much? And we've gotten that feedback that you know, maybe we presented too much. An hour and 20 minutes was too much when it could have been done quicker. So we've tweaked things as we went on because we've gotten that feedback from the board, and we'll continue to do that. So yeah, altogether, it's ongoing continuous improvement on this.
Good. And Dave, you raise a good point, and Cheryl, you probably feel this way as well, but I think it's important to recognize that you're going to be talking about things occasionally that perhaps your board doesn't understand. So if your board doesn't reach out to you to have conversation about, just as Dave suggested, about scaled scores, about, you know, some of these other pieces that you might be talking about relative to student achievement data, you might want to, you know, take an opportunity to be proactive and just generally educate them on what all of that means. Again, they don't need to understand the level of detail that you do as school leaders, but they need to understand enough that they can make some well-informed decisions and ask some wise questions around those elements. So thanks for that, Dave. That was a good reminder that I think it's just important that you communicate with your board to ensure that they understand, generally speaking, those kinds of conversations and that terminology. So great. Thanks, Dave. So moving on, next, so we covered are the children learning through those bullet points that we just shared. Now, of course, from the board's perspective, they always want to be sure that they're safeguarding the taxpayers' dollars. So how can you, Cheryl, as a school leader, you, Dave, help your boards best reach that place where they're comfortable in knowing that they're taking good care of the taxpayers' dollars? So you might have different perspectives on this, Dave and Cheryl, but I'll tell you from my CMU and from my National Charter Schools Institute days, we profess that at every board meeting, a board should be receiving at a minimum those first 4 bulleted documents. So a balance sheet, an income expense report, a cash flow statement, what's coming in, what's going out, and that budget versus actual report. So hopefully that's happening. Cheryl, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm going to ask you, do you generally share this kind of financial information, or does your service provider share this kind of information on a monthly basis with your board?
Yes, we actually do. If it's not us, as like we called it like a board liaison, if it's not the board liaison position, it would be someone from our finance team comes to all of our monthly meetings.
Good.
And if they don't make it, then the finance person collaborates with the board liaison prior to.
Perfect.
To go over and kind of say, here's where we're at right now.
Good. Good, good. That's great to know. And then obviously conversation around fund balance. You know, what is our existing fund balance? And this is another one of those probably teachable moments with your board, because I think what boards sometimes don't always understand, and this isn't true of every board, but you know, I've been to board meetings where I've sensed that there's not a real genuine understanding of fund balance. So, you know, if your fund balance is $850,000, does that mean as a board I can write a check tomorrow for $850,000 because that's what I have in my bank account Probably not. That fund balance is made up of different financial nuances that it's probably important for your board to understand if they don't understand that already. And here I'm going to share another little story with you. I've been working with a school board in the Detroit area, relatively new school, relatively new board, and I actually had an opportunity to work with them about 2 months ago. And we got into this whole conversation about finances, and when I asked them what their fund balance was, they had no idea. And furthermore, they didn't even understand that the fund balance was really their fund balance, not the management company's fund balance. So I think it's always important for the board to understand that at the end of the day, the finances, and I'll use this phrase very loosely, but the finances are your finances, right? The money that is going into the operations of the school are the dollars and cents for which at the end of the day you as the school are responsible. The board is responsible. So I think, again, any opportunity as a school leader that you have to just gently remind the board of that is a teachable moment. So just a little added story there. And then best practice incentive dollars. The board understanding that there are some best practice incentive dollars that you qualify for as a school, and I think you, Dave, and you, Cheryl, likely know that that's part of the State School Aid Act, Section 22F, where the governor has designated $52 per pupil if a school meets 7 of 8 best practice incentives. So, there might be some best practice dollars added on to, for example, your per pupil dollar amount that you might want to just show your board. So again, I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to ask Dave to share any financial insights that he has here, and I know he has a few. So Dave, why don't you just share with Cheryl, and obviously in the future others are going to hear this, what your perspective is in terms of ensuring that the board understands its financial responsibilities.
Yeah, I think monthly discussions of the 4 areas, bullet points that you had placed on there are well needed and should be mandatory. I know one of the things, some of the feedback we got from Lake State last year was that, we're at your board meetings, we know you're presenting financials at the monthly board meetings that we're at, but hey, we don't see it in your meeting minutes. And so that was something that we wanted to make, or on the agenda rather, or in the minutes. So
right.
We wanted to make sure that that was clear and transparent. So we've actually added on my report every month, and then when we have quarterlies, obviously those are on there, discussion of the financials within the superintendent's report. And so that was something just to make it more clear that that's going to be on the agenda. But one of the, we always kind of talk about, should we have committees or task forces and what needs to get done at the school level. And I believe that the finance committee is probably one of the most important, if not the most important committee. Because I think we all talk the same language when it comes to the assessments and state requirements and achievement, and even the college prep assessments. But everyone's budget is just so very different. And so I'm not saying other committees aren't important, but we all pay different amounts for salaries, and we all have different payables each month, and different state aid note amounts, with different interest rates through different commercial lenders. And so there's so many differences that geez, I really hope schools are meeting, at least 1 or 2, but board members on some kind of a finance committee structure on a regular basis. I think times are changing, but most, if not all, the schools I've ever been affiliated with that may have had to close have usually been because of financial issues,
right,
and not other issues. And so, that's just kind of my personal thoughts on the finance committee's importance of it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And, also just remembering that your board, obviously, and you know this, Dave, you know this, Cheryl, certainly from the financial perspective, has a reporting requirement to its authorizer, to Lake Superior State University. Um, so it's important that, certainly the board understands this. And the one piece that isn't in here but comes a little bit later, but it is financial related, is your audit, obviously. So as a school leader, just ensuring that the board understands that, through the hiring of the independent auditor, that it has engaged, that there is an annual audit conducted, and that there is going to be a report shared relative to the outcomes of that audit. So that's certainly another finance piece that you'll want to consider talking about with your board at the appropriate time. So next, and the third key component to this what should I be sharing with my board section is business operations. Are they in good working order? And as a board, what do I need to understand about the outcomes relative to those business operations? So certainly compliance reporting. Are we timely? Are we accurate? Is our reporting complete? Are the reports that we're sending in to whether it be Lake Superior State University or the Intermediate School District or the state, are they complete? So really, I think important for the board to understand that, and really, again, for school leadership to understand that this piece of the puzzle shouldn't be underestimated, because again, as Nick and Lake Superior State University are looking at your overall performance, compliance reporting is certainly a consideration in some of their high stakes decisions. So just understanding that there is value placed on compliance reporting is good for you to know from the school leadership perspective, and certainly critical for the board to understand. So we talked a little bit about audit, so I put that under business operations. It could really go under both finance and business operations. So just ensuring that the board understands that the independent auditor that it engaged is going to be conducting an audit on X date, and that after the audit is complete, that auditor is likely going to be sharing the results of that audit at the public meeting. So this is really, about scheduling and really about communicating with the board when it can expect those results to be shared. HR functions, how are we doing? How well are we doing? This is from the board's perspective, so what you need to be thinking about from a school leadership perspective, how well are we doing retaining staff? What does our turnover look like? How well are we doing recruiting staff? As turnover happens, are we filling those positions relatively quickly, and are we attracting high quality staff to the school? What do staff performance outcomes look like? Now, I understand that in a situation where there's a third-party provider, that the third-party provider is likely going to conduct those evaluations, or that school leadership might conduct them, share them with the third-party provider, but that doesn't in any way preclude the board from understanding how the staff is performing. So while the board isn't going to be conducting those staff evaluations, I think it's important for the board to understand how well is our staff performing. So I included that in the HR functions. And then just sharing both positive and negative information related to any staff situations. Again, this comes a little bit later, so I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I think this is a good time to mention first that you both know you never want to blindside your board, right? So you never want to be in a situation where something has happened with your staff that maybe 2 weeks later your board is having to respond to from the media or the authorizer that it wasn't even aware of. That's a really bad position position to put your board in. So just be certain that in some format you're sharing both that positive and negative information with the board about staff, about those HR elements. And facilities reports. So if there's anything going on from a facilities perspective, I think the two key things that the board is interested in typically knowing from a facilities perspective, particularly as it relates to any facilities work, are we on time and are we on budget? So just ensuring that you're prepared to answer those questions if indeed your facility is undergoing any kind of renovations, I think is important. Facilities inspections, as the authorizer conducts those, walks through the facility to determine is it conducive to learning from a safety and health perspective. Understanding, or at least allowing the board to understand when that walkthrough is going to happen, and again, recognizing that there are going to be results from that you're going to share at a future board meeting. And then, of course, any incident or potential incident to which the board should be alerted. So this covers kind of a very broad spectrum of business operations. But again, this gets to the whole notion of never blindsiding your board and never putting your board in a position where they're learning about something that happened at the school from someone else. I had said media, but remember, these boards are very public people. So in a grocery store, they might engage in a conversation. It's just natural that maybe someone will walk up to them and say, oh, I'm sorry to hear what happened at the school last week. You don't want them to be in a position where they're having to ask, oh, well, what happened? So again, just a reminder that, those incidents really need to be reported to the board, or at least make the board aware and or alerted. So Dave, I'm going to unmute you again and just ask you to share any of those practical thoughts relative to business operations that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I think, so in business operations, we talk about financial audit, which you mentioned, and then the facilities report or facilities audit that happens at least annually by Lake State. But when it comes to I guess operations in general, being a new school, this is our second year in operation, we probably had every audit that I can think of. From the State Department doing a Title I audit to a focus monitoring visit for a special ed program. And then obviously the facilities audits that Lake State conducts. And we're going to have a homeless youth liaison, McKinney Bento audit, which I didn't even know existed. So
right.
I think that the board really has to be aware of any audit that happens and the outcome, because it's I don't want to say it's okay to have a corrective action plan, but you're going to have to fix some things, and they need to understand that a corrective action plan doesn't mean that things are bad. It means you have to fix things in a timely manner, and unfortunately, sometimes there's things that happen and changes in the industry that schools don't find out about in a timely manner. And so, I've had to go to my board and do a few corrective action plans and explain to them what those were, and we got it done complete and accurate and timely. And so they were very appreciative of being educated on those relative audits, and then having knowledge of what the corrective action plan entailed, and so they could speak at least somewhat intelligently about each one of those when they were approached by Lake State or other folks in the industry or in the community, because it's such a small community that we live in oftentimes that does have, like you stated. So
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Dave. And Cheryl, what about you? Do you have anything that you'd like to share relative to business operations and how you really help your board manage these pieces?
I mean, one of the biggest things that I take away just from everything that we've been saying, and I was going to chime in earlier, but I didn't, is just the whole component of just educating your board.
Yeah, right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I sure can.
I found how valuable that is. A lot of times you don't want to surprise them, number one. And number two, you have to make sure that they know. So you really do have to take the proper time to educate them on all aspects, day-to-day inspiration to financial things especially. And I've just learned in everything I've done just how important it is to take that time to make sure you educate your board in every
Right.
aspect of what you're doing so there are no surprises for them.
Good.
And I just think that's one of the most valuable things I've learned from working with boards is just making sure that you take the proper time to do that and how essentially important it is to your relationship with them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that really gets back to don't take for granted that they know everything, right? Because they don't, and I think they would tell you that they don't. So just ensuring that they generally understand these components for which at the end of the day they're responsible, and education is one way to help them do that. So absolutely, thank you. Those are really good comments, Cheryl. And then, what other kinds of information should we be sharing with our boards that maybe wasn't nicely captured in those other previous slides? Student enrollment information. And I know Dave has some perspectives on this, and I'll turn it over to him momentarily. But, does your board understand where you're at from an enrollment perspective? And certainly what makes this important is that budgeting component for which the board is completely responsible. So helping them understand that, wow, yesterday you might have had 250 students, today you have 230, and why is that? Events in which you would appreciate board support or attendance. So let me just share here, I think that generally some boards are hesitant about attending in whole, right, events and or ceremonial matters at the school because there's this fear that they're going to be in violation of the Open Meetings Act. Let me just share with you, and I know you know this, Cheryl, I know you know this, Dave, but that is not the intent and or the spirit of the Open Meetings Act. So can a board as a whole attend, ribbon cutting at the school? Absolutely. Can the board attend, student award events? Absolutely. That's very practical. It's very appropriate. I think it's very nice to see board members in attendance at those events. So that is in no way in violation of the Open Meetings Act. Of course, you both know that the Open Meetings Act is designed to ensure that public board deliberations and decisions are made before the public. So obviously, boards can't use these events to, make decisions, but certainly they can attend in good conscience. So just a reminder that there should be no fears behind that. And then recognition for positive press reports, publicity. If you're a blue ribbon school, or if you've achieved some kind of accolades through assessments, whether it be MEP or NWEA performance series, just be sure to share those with your board. And are there any school visitors that we're anticipating? And I use dignitaries here, particularly around Reading Month, right? March is Reading Month, so a lot of schools invite dignitaries to come and read. Is that something that your board would be interested in knowing? Absolutely. So any of those kinds of school visits, if LSSU is coming for a school visit, I think it would be important for the board to understand when that's happening and why. So again, they can be well informed. So Dave, again, on that student enrollment piece, why don't you talk a little bit about what it is that you share from a student enrollment perspective with your board?
Yeah, I firmly believe that student enrollment should be updated at the monthly board meetings, and a couple reasons. Since the funding's changed, with Section 25. From count day to count day, I mean, obviously the whole funding scheme has changed, and depending on if you had a large exit of students or a large enrollment for any given time during that period, that can affect your budget quite a bit. And one of the things that my board has asked me to do is give them some more information on why students may exit the academy. and why they may enter throughout the school year. And so that's been, that's been a helpful push for me to get ongoing information on, simply what, again, why students are coming and going. So we don't have fortunately, we don't have a lot of turnover, and we do have a high student retention rate, but it is nice when you have at least one or two, that you can speak to why those folks are transferring in or out. So that's something my board specifically asked for each month, and it's pretty easy to be able to give that. And then, again, you're keeping your eye on the money, in a sense, when you're looking at enrollment each month.
Right.
And we always say that parents vote with their feet. So if you've got a stable enrollment or maybe even increasing enrollment, you're probably doing something right.
Yeah, exactly. And again, you raise a good point, Dave, and I touched upon this when we were talking about student enrollment, but, if you're experiencing significant attrition in your student enrollment, then obviously that's going to require some budget amendments. And again, there are budget implications to that. So another reason why your board needs to understand those student enrollment activities.
And one other quick thing, Angie, if you don't mind.
Sure, no, go right ahead.
So the law, if I remember correctly, it states that, you can have boards can cut off enrollment at a certain point in time during a school year if it's board approved. And so some schools choose to do that, and then there's been some controversy over, charter schools or public, should they be able to do that? But my point to all that is, if you have students enrolling during the school year, and it's after a date where funding changes, well, now you're bringing in additional students potentially without additional resources. And so whatever the board's feeling is on that, or the schools rather, I think that needs to be understood, because there has been schools that have closed, and other schools have picked up students and without additional resources. And so what does that look like for a budget year?
Yeah, exactly. And again, student enrollment is one of those conversations that you're going to want to have with your board, right? What frequency do you want to see student enrollment numbers? Dave, you present them at every board meeting because that's what your board has asked you to do, but Cheryl, your board might want to see student enrollment numbers, every couple of months. So just, again, understanding what the expectation is at the board level, I think is important for that student enrollment discussion.
If I could say, we actually do it on a monthly basis.
Do you? Okay.
Yeah, we do, and some of our schools have more transient populations.
Yeah.
But we also are really careful to track where it is that our students are going, because that's always a question our board's like, no, where did they go? Or,
right.
Why did so-and-so leave, and where did these people come from? So I just want to say really quick, I'm so sorry, but it's after 7. I actually have a 7:15 phone call I need to be on as well.
Oh, okay, sure, sorry.
I want to just be high and dry and not say
okay,
that.
Good, thank you.
Listen for anything I missed after.
Okay, sounds good. And we got started a little bit late, Cheryl, so I think we'll go a little bit longer. But feel free to access the rest of it online through LSSU's website.
Yes, that's what I'm going to do. I thank you so much. I appreciate all the information as well.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So, okay, Dave and Nick, I guess it's just down to the two of us, but again, for future reference and access, I think we'll just continue. So obviously school leaders can access the information accordingly. So now we're going to get to the when of all of this, right? When should I be sharing information with my board? When should I be communicating with my board? Again, in the context, in the spirit of what we're talking about, communication. So what we're suggesting here is that you determine or identify those mutual timing expectations around the sharing of all of this information with your board. So, but a few points around that we wanted to emphasize this evening. I think it's important from a school leadership perspective for you to ensure that your board understands that it might not be receiving academic achievement data at every board meeting. So what I'm getting at there is understanding that the board understands the testing schedule. So at every board meeting, it's not going to see NWEA MAP results or PST results or MEP results. However, we do recommend that student achievement be addressed at every board meeting. So again, hearkening back to my prior experiences, when I was at the Institute, and I would say even today, we profess or subscribe to what we refer to as a 30-30-30 agenda. And what that suggests is that board meetings should not be longer than 90 minutes, and that every board meeting should have an agenda spot where 30 minutes is dedicated to student achievement discussion, 30 minutes is dedicated to business operations, so this is including some of the components that we talked about in prior slides, so the finances and the business operations being in good working order, and then the last 30 minutes being dedicated to the board's own professional development. So again, in the spirit of that first bullet, while they're not going to receive comprehensive reports talking about student achievement data in the context of outcomes at every board meeting, I think is really important. And then again, I think also determining how or what data information can be shared more consistently in an effort to, as I say here, help the board understand the academic environment at the academy is important. And again, this is going to require some communication between school leadership and the board on what their expectations are around that data and information. So, again, we might not be talking about achievement outcomes or assessment outcomes at every board meeting, but there might be some conversation around those at-risk programs that we talked about a little bit earlier, for example. How well are we doing with those title dollars and using those title dollars to educate the children that are arguably in most need? So just helping the board understand that academic environment. Ensure that you and the board understand that it will be receiving and that you will be sharing financial information at every board meeting. So that's the 30 minutes of the board meeting that is consistent. You're going to be talking about finances. You're going to be talking about materials to support those financial discussions at every board meeting, and those are primarily the four elements that we talked about under the what a few slides ago. And then what is the board's expectation on sharing compliance-related information? So every month, does the board want to report on the accuracy, the timeliness, the completeness of compliance reporting? Does it want to see it quarterly? Again, what are the timing expectations around compliance reported or related matters? And then I'm suggesting here that you really use your master calendar of reporting requirements to guide those timely discussions, because there are expectations that have been outlined for your board in that master calendar that's going to require the board to take some action in advance of those reporting requirement timelines that you and the board are going to be sensitive to or should be sensitive to. So remember to use that master calendar to help track the on-track actions for the board. And then, again, identify those timing expectations regarding board packets and meet those expectations. So does the board, want its financial information, its board packets, inclusive of financial information, a week before the board meeting, 2 weeks before the board meeting? What do those timing expectations look like there? And then, Dave actually pointed this out, which I very much appreciated, is, how and when does the board want you as school leadership to communicate those last-minute communications pieces? And invariably, they're going to happen. So again, what are the expectations there around last-minute communications? When do you want those? Do you want those at the board meeting? Do you want those as soon as they happen? I wouldn't expect that the board would want a month to pass before it's shared those, what I would refer to last minute communication. So again, reaching some kind of mutual understanding on the timing around that is really important. And then, what are the expectations in terms of timing around any unexpected absences? So if you're discussing timing considerations, as I suggest here, be sure to share with the board any information that might or could impede meeting those timing expectations, and be sure that you're making as school leadership those necessary adjustments in advance. So I say here, if you're attending a conference, if you're going to be on vacation, what do you need to do in advance to ensure that your board is meeting any timing expectations that are that are imposed upon them while you're away? So again, Dave, is there anything that you'd like to share there with respect to the when and those timing expectations?
You did a great job in capturing that. The one thing that's coming to mind now is we're getting ready to go through our mid-contract review with Lake State, and so we're starting to have more and more discussions around or bringing the charter contract and pieces of it, especially the educational goals, to the board, just to remind them, here's our educational goals in the charter contract, on top of other goals that we've made through school improvement planning and so forth. And so that's just something I kind of wanted to plug in there as well.
Yeah, good.
From time to time, I think the board needs to be reminded of or visiting the charter contract.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And Nick, is there anything from the authorizer's perspective that you want to share, either relative to the when or the what that we've talked about so far?
No, I think you both have covered it pretty completely. I'd just like to make a comment, though, is I have many boards that will cancel a board meeting because of lack of agenda items or information that needs to be addressed. And, I just feel they may not have an action item that needs to be addressed by the board, but there's so much information out there that needs to be presented to the board to understand the general operations of the school in the direction that the school is heading. So, like I said, I think you're presenting a lot of excellent information as far as what can be presented at the board, and I hope the administrators can contribute that and present those things at the board on a regular basis.
Right. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Yeah. I feel that way too, and I'm sure Dave shares, that sentiment. Is there's always something to talk about. Right. So, I mean, we experienced that too, I think, when we were at CMU, and I'm sure Dave has experienced this in his leadership role. There's always something to talk about at board meetings that are outcomes-based. So I think, that's certainly an interesting and very appropriate piece to add. So thanks, Nick, and thanks, Dave. So I'll actually, because it's just the two of you, I probably do not need to mute you because there's no interference. So I'll just leave you unmuted, and you can just interject accordingly. So now we're going to get into the why conversation. So again, we've talked about the what, we've talked about the when, we've talked about sharing. So why does this even matter, right? Why is it important that my board and I even share information, or that I share information with the board? So what we're submitting to all of you here is that there are expectations of the board. There are expectations that are imposed by the authorizer, and there are personal and there are collective expectations relative to their role, regulatory legal expectations, that they'll act in a timely and responsible manner. So sharing information to get them to that place where they're acting in a timely, responsible manner and making those effective, timely, responsible decisions is really important. So again, in the spirit of this conversation, helping the board be timely and be responsible, I think, is an important role of school leadership. And again, in that same vein, the second bullet, your board has critical decision-making responsibilities, and the relevant, meaningful information that you can provide to help ensure that those good decisions are being made. And as I share here, in the spirit of advancing the mission of the Academy is also just incredibly critical. We talked a little bit about this already, but it's important to share information because you never want your board to be blindsided by unexpected data, information, details, by unexpected questions, by unexpected conversation. They should always be in the know relative to what it is they need to know in the context of their role as board members. And always remember that your board is the Academy's connection to its authorizer. So this is just a good opportunity to remind you as school leaders that the charter contract under which you're operating is between Lake Superior State University and your board of directors. So the authorizer, Lake State, is always looking to your board to answer those academic achievement outcome questions, those financial outcome questions, and those board or those school operations outcomes questions. So to help with that, again, it's important that you share with your board enough information that they can carry on, as I say here, those intelligible conversations with its authorizer, with the board's authorizer about the status of the Academy. And then finally, regarding why, two last bullets, take advantage of those teachable board moments, right? So when you're presenting that academic information, and we talked a little bit about this, right, remind the board why you administer Performance Series by Scantron, why you administer the NWEA MAP assessment, why you administer the MEEP, although that's state mandated, but particularly the two nationally normed reference tests in both Performance Series and NWEA MAP that most schools authorized by Lake State administer. So, you know, again, in the context of why is it important that I share this information, I give a little bit of example there where I used kind of Charlton Heston as the Academy example that, you know, use that opportunity to say, hey, board, remember, we're really interested in proficiency and growth. So these assessments, these NWEA MAP or Performance Series assessments that we administer 2 to 3 times per year really help get us to, again, that place where we can better understand if we're growing our student population and, you know, if they're meeting those proficiency targets. So again, that's a very specific example of why you might share academic achievement information with your board relative to those two tests in particular, and using that as an opportunity to remind them why that's important. And then finally, under the why, I submit, Dave and I submit here that transparency, integrity, and common understanding really do encourage that healthy board-school leader relationship. So I think Dave can attest to the fact that he has a very good relationship, very healthy relationship with his board, and he's been able to forge that through effective communication. Is that a fair assessment, Dave?
Yeah, that is. Thank you. And one of the things that we've scheduled, which we're, you know, a little over a year and a half in operation, maybe we could have done it even earlier, but we've scheduled strategic planning, and so that'll be a process over time and constantly revisited is the plan. But we'll have 2 full days, or 2 half days rather, consecutive half days to really kind of spark that process with a well-seasoned former school leader who's going to facilitate it for us.
Yeah, good. Yeah, perfect. You know, that's very important too, to just undergo that strategic planning that hopefully and ultimately addresses all of these components that we're talking about this evening. So thank you. Now getting to the how. So this is really going to address, and we'll move through this relatively quickly, understanding how your board would like you to communicate with it. And I mentioned a little bit earlier that understanding the personal individual board dynamics is important, and this is why. Because you might have board members that want information over the telephone. You might have board members that want information via email or want written correspondence. Now, do you need to be, pleasing to every individual board member? I'm not sure about that, but you at least need to understand, as I say here, what makes them tick, right, in terms of communicating with them. So just kind of assessing, how does your board first generally as a collective like to best communicate? And then what about those individual board members? What can I expect from them in terms of their communication expectations? And I also suggest here that you identify together between board and school leadership what presentation format, would you like the information shared in? So I say here, if you prepare a written administrator's report pursuant to the board's desires, I've been through several board meetings. Nick, I know you've sat through many. Dave, you probably have two, where the administrator's report is just, first of all, the administrator's reading it, right, at the board meeting, verbatim, and it's really focused on probably more inputs than outcomes. So I would even say from an administrator's report perspective, as you talk about the presentation format, to be sure that the board really thinks about what kind of outcomes conversation do you want me to have with you relative to that administrator's report. I think that's, an important piece of that conversation. And then, again, just understanding your individual board members and what makes them tick. I'm working with a pre-operational school right now. It's a new management company, new board, new school. So the dynamics around that have been very interesting. I've been to several of their board meetings, and as a management company, they're trying to kind of understand each individual board member and what they can expect of them at each board meeting. So again, understanding that I think is very important, and it helps you as a school leader and or a management company stay on your proverbial toes, as they say. So if you can anticipate that at every meeting, John Smith is going to ask about playground equipment, then you need to be prepared to talk about playground equipment. Of course, as outcomes basis, you can have a playground equipment conversation, but just really getting into the individual board members' heads and understanding what makes them tick, so you as a school leader can come to the meeting prepared and ready to address those individual board member questions as well as the collective questions that they might have. Dave, is there anything you'd like to add there?
No, that was that was great.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. And then just, I think one of the last slides, other than just sharing kind of what those visuals might look like, is, what's the board president's role in this whole communications piece? Does he or she want you to communicate with just him or her, and is he or she going to undertake the responsibility of sharing that information with the entire board? Again, what role does the board president play in these ongoing communications? And then I suggest here, and Dave touched upon this a few slides ago when we were talking about finance, the finance committee, and his philosophy that the finance committee is probably the most important committee, is really helping the board communicate through committees as appropriate and necessary. So when do they need to form a committee? Maybe you can help with that as school leadership as they're struggling with that. Again, I was just at a board meeting on Monday night, and we were talking about policy related decisions, and not so much around policy specifically, but who should this particular board use to engage in policy conversations. The National Charter Schools Institute, someone else, or someone else. And the conversation was, should we identify a committee for that? And of course, the recommendation was probably not for something like that. And that came from leadership. So don't be afraid to just, help the board understand what committees are appropriate and what times might it not be as necessary to form a committee. And then I suggest here, and I know this is, again, near and dear to Dave's heart, where appropriate and necessary, align your communications with board policy. So if you have board policies that speak to the kinds of communications that we're talking about this evening, so, the what, the when, the why, and the how, be sure that as a school leader, you understand those policy expectations and that you can meet them. And oftentimes, schools that have policies have some kind of administrative procedures that help school leadership carry out those policy expectations that the board has implemented on a day-to-day basis. But in the absence of those administrative procedures, just be sure that you understand those policies, and where there are, communications directives within the policies, be sure you're aligning with those and meeting those. Dave, is there anything you'd like to add there with respect to board policy?
No, and I mean, I think regardless if you use your own legal counsel or if you're using like the National Charter Schools Institute to draft policies, we get those twice a year to the board in a timely manner to review and take action on the updates. And so they get a hard copy if they want, but electronically, and I believe it's even web-based through the Institute's website, if I don't recall correctly. So, they can reference it, and I encourage them to do that.
Yep, very good. Thank you. And then just a reminder to all of you to be sure that you're presenting materials in simple visual formats for your board. So where you can, be sure to use graphs and charts. And then if there's explanation necessary, you can either share that verbally or with a written summary, whatever your board desires, if the visuals and or graphs are not self-explanatory. So just quickly, I shared some of these in past webinars, but just simple graphs and charts. And these are just examples of what you might want to share relative to how well you're doing in student performance, how well you're doing on, grade 5 science, which again, on that chart on the right, you're going to see that exact chart likely in your MEP reports that you've received from Lake Superior State University. But again, board understands that a check mark is good, a red X is not so great. Again, something simple that really can help them understand the how wells of both, certainly academic and finance as I'm presenting here. So this is the academic piece. Finance piece, again, a couple of chart graph examples. The first one I give is, maybe your board wants to better understand what your foundation allowance is and what it becomes with those best practice incentives. So a nice, just graph to share with them. And then on the right, this gets to the fund balance discussion. Again, just examples, percentage of total revenue, relative to fund balance. So again, just keeping it simple, sharing those graphs, sharing those visuals, enough that the board can understand it. Be sure that they do understand it. And again, if they don't understand the simple graphs or charts, be sure you have conversation with how you can help them better understand, whether it be through written materials, verbal information, whatever is most desirable from the board's perspective. So In summary, just quickly, good, effective communication matters and is the key in forging a healthy working relationship with your board. An effectively managed board can make your jobs so much easier. And it's never too late to evaluate communication, and I would encourage you as school leadership to ask consistently of your board, how am I doing for you? Am I communicating with you effectively? Am I giving you too much information, too little information? You know, are we talking about the whats, whens, whys, and hows of communication on some regular or consistent basis? So again, whether you're a school leader that, you know, you're into your first year novice, or you've been doing this for several years, a veteran leader, don't stop having those kinds of conversations with your boards, because I think it continues to be really critical that you are all on the same page relative to communication expectations. And then again, as I alluded to a couple minutes ago, check in with your board periodically. How can I better communicate with you? And finally, a board that looks good makes you look good. So behind every effective board is an equally effective school leader, is what I'm sharing with you. So that's what we really talked about this evening. That's the essence of what we talked about this evening. And again, I hope as you're listening to this as school leaders, you take away some nuggets that you can apply at the board table with your board and really forge that healthy working relationship with your board in the context of your school leadership role. So Nick and Dave, anything more you'd like to add before we close the webinar?
No, I think you've covered a lot of good information, and you know, if any of the listeners who would like to contact me, email me with questions, I'd be glad to answer anything or communicate with them. But again, thank you, Angie, and thank you, Dave.
Yeah, our pleasure. And Dave, I want to thank you too for your willingness to participate in this webinar. I know when school leaders listen to it that, you know, they're really going to find the value you've added. So thank you very much for not just participating, but your help in preparing for it.
Thanks, and thanks, Nick.
Take care.
Good. Thanks both of you. Have a great evening.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.